Hi there. Welcome back to Bill's Ramblings and to another video about my life. Today I want to talk about when I went into the military. I joined the National Guard and in 1981, in March of 1981, and then I was in the National Guard and the Army Reserve for 8 years. And I want to start with when I left Phoenix to go to basic training. I did basic training in Fort Dix, New Jersey, and got on a plane in Phoenix. It was nice and warm, and got off the plane in New Jersey. It was freezing cold. There was snow on the ground. It was quite a change. And of course, the first thing they do is they put you in the induction center where they take away your civilian clothes and they give you army clothes, and they give you a haircut, and they start giving you the basic, what's going to happen type of thing. And I think I was in induction for about maybe 4 or 5 days, and then once we get all haircutted and get our uniforms on and everything, we all went into the big auditorium, and all the drill sergeants marched in, and boy, they looked nice. They were shiny and pressed and beautiful and impressive. And they stood up there on the auditorium and told us what a great thing we were doing for our country and how we were going to be soldiers, and we were going to, it was just a pretty impressive thing. And then when it all got done, they did a single file, and each person went out into their particular unit. And we went into cattle trucks. And I'm telling you, these were cattle trucks, big semi trailers. And we were smashed into these trailers like we were cattle. We were smashed in there so we couldn't even move. And we drove around and around and around and around and around. We had no idea where we were going. As far as we knew, we left New Jersey altogether and we were somewhere else. I think they did that on purpose to get us confused. But when they opened up the cattle trucks, we were now faced with the actual basic training, and yelling and cussing and screaming at us and calling us names and get over here and get over there and do this and do that. And they put us into our units and told us to stand at attention, and we had to take our duffel bags that had all our personal things in it, and of course our military uniforms and the stuff they had issued us. And we were standing in line there in our formation, and the drill sergeant that we had for me, he came over, and he saw that I had a little tin of aspirin, the kind that you get in the store that holds about 8 aspirin. And he says to me, "Private Griffin, are you a drug addict?" And I said, "No, drill sergeant, I'm not a drug addict." And he says, "What are you doing with all these drugs?" And I said, "Well, I'll say, yeah." And he says, "You need to go throw those away." So I said, "Yes, drill sergeant." And right in front of me was a trash can. So I just ran 2 steps, threw it in the trash can, and ran back to, standing at attention in front of the drill sergeant. And he said, "Private Griffin, do you think I'm stupid?" And I'm saying, "No, drill sergeant." And he says, "I didn't mean that one. You get it and you throw it in that one down the road." I don't know how far it was, but it was a long ways. And I had to get the aspirin and run it down there and throw it in that one. I ran back, and now I'm really tired. And he says, "Private Griffin, now that you've done this and you need to knock down and give me 100 push-ups." And so I started to get down there to do 100 push-ups. And he says, "Boy, Private Griffin, everything you're doing is just making me mad today." He said, "Do you think I meant that you were supposed to just do regular old push-ups?" "No." He says, "You get down there with your duffel bag on your back and give me 100 push-ups." Well, I tell you what, that duffel bag, I bet that duffel bag weighed more than I did. But I did it. I managed to get 100 push-ups out of with that duffel bag on my back. And that was the opening to my basic training. And we had 150 new recruits that went into the unit that I was in. And oddly enough, we only graduated 75. And that just blew my mind when we got to graduation practice, that only 75 of the 150 actually made it through. Now, we were the last unit that I know of in that particular area that we went through 12 weeks of basic training. Right after that, they dropped it down to 8 weeks. And I don't know if those 4 weeks made a lot of difference, but 12 weeks was a long time. It was a long time to be in that type of environment. And, we got up early in the morning. I mean, like 4 o'clock, and they'd come in and they'd through the barracks and they'd bang on the trash cans with their sticks, and they'd come yelling and cussing and calling us names, and we'd better get out there and in formation. It didn't matter if it was raining or snowing or anything. I mean, you got out there and you'd better get out there fast. And I remember standing out in formation in the rain and in the snow. 4 o'clock in the morning, we had to do calisthenics, and we did push-ups and everything you can think of. We ran miles and miles. And then we'd go eat breakfast, and you couldn't eat your food. You had to swallow it. I mean, we'd go in and we stood longer in line than we did actually eating our food. And one day, a friend of mine that slept in the cot next to me, his name was Joe, and Joe says to me one morning after wake up, he said, Griff, he says, I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm going to quit. And I said, why? Why, Joe? Why you want to quit? And he says, I can't taste my food. I said, forget about that. Don't go and quit. I said, you can taste your food after basic training. Just don't do that. You're going to regret it. And he said, no, I'm not. I quit. I'm just not going to do it anymore. And later that day, after we had been in all the stuff we were doing, we were in a classroom. We were all exhausted. We were tired. And I saw him walk over to the senior drill sergeant, and you never went to the senior drill sergeant. And he went around our sergeants, and he went to the senior drill sergeant, and he handed him a note. And now I know what the note said because Joe showed it to me before he gave it to him. And that note said, I quit. I'm not doing this anymore. And the sad thing about Joe, when I graduated 12 weeks later, they still hadn't managed to get his discharge papers in order. He was out there mowing the grass and painting the walls and digging in the driveways and moving piles of dirt and everything. And I said, so Joe, I said, are you happy now? I'm going home. I'm done here. And you're still here mowing the grass. He says, yeah, but I won. I'm out of this man's army. And I said, well, okay. That's okay, Joe. That's up to you. Well, I want to tell you, we'd been in there for a while, and, we were starting to learn, what we needed to do and all of that. And one day the drill sergeant comes in, and he said, we were all standing in formation, and he said, I'm going to practice. I want you all to practice a saying. So every morning I'm going to come out here in formation. I'm going to ask you, how do you feel? And we're all supposed to answer, standing at attention, and we're supposed to shout at the top of our lungs, sick, lame, and lazy, airborne, crazy, ho! And, he made us practice that thing for probably a good 30 minutes. And every time he'd walk off and he'd walk back and he'd say, unit, how do you feel today? And everybody responded with the same thing. Sick, lame, and lazy, airborne, crazy, ho! And we did that. And he said, okay, I think we've got it down now. Don't forget. And we went about our business for the rest of the day and went to bed that night. And we got up bright and early the next morning, and we're standing in formation, and it's snowing. Our hands are frozen to our rifles, and we're standing at attention. And the drill sergeant walks up, and he says, how do we feel today? And I shouted at the top of my lungs, sick, lame, and lazy, airborne, crazy. Who? And I was the only one. I was the only one in the entire unit that did that. And the drill sergeant looked at me, and he came running over and got right in my face and looked at me, and he said, Private Griffin, what do you think you're doing? And I said, Drill Sergeant, you told us. And he says, step forward. And I said, yes, Sergeant. So I stepped forward. He says, about face. And I turned around and I was standing there. And you know, I learned early in basic training, don't let them know your name. Don't do anything out of the ordinary so that they can recognize you, because they're going to give you the most push-ups. They're just going to dog you. So don't let them know your name, and don't do anything special. Well, here I thought that somebody had rescinded the directions on what we were supposed to answer, and nobody bothered to tell me. And so here I was going to be singled out, and I was going to be dogged, and I was going to get all kinds of push-ups and run miles and miles and miles with my pack on. And I just thought, oh my goodness, man, I'm in trouble now. And he said, Private Griffin, at ease. So I took the position of at ease, and I'm standing there. And he proceeded to make the rest of the entire unit do push-ups until they thought they were going to drop dead. And they did mountain climbers, and they did push-ups, and they did sit-ups, and I tell you what, it was ugly. And then from there, he took them and had them run around the deal and lapped and lapped and lapped, and came back around. And he said to the entire unit, he said, how come everybody else is more stupid than Private Griffin here? Private Griffin at least knew how to answer the question. Well, you know, that made me real popular in that unit. At least if I'd have, you know, not said anything, everybody else, I would have had the same punishment that they did. But anyway, I kind of stood out after that, and I was the one that answered the question. Well, you know, the next day they got the answer right, and they all said it as loud as they could. They wanted to make sure that the drill sergeants heard them. And so, you know, it's one of those things. From there, you know, in that, I became a squad leader after that. I guess being able to shout made me squad leader material. So I got to be a squad leader. And, you know, I graduated in June of 1981 at the ripe old age of 19, and went from there to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, where I was going to be a truck driver. And I did well as a truck driver. I had driven tractors, and you know, I knew how to drive, wasn't a problem. And driving a big semi truck wasn't anything. We drove with the little Jeep, and then we did pickup trucks, and then we went to the big 5-ton trucks, and then after that we drove the big road haulers that they had recently come out with. And well, anyway, I graduated second in the class, not second as the smartest, I mean second in the fastest. And so you just went at your own pace, and I was pretty well tired of military, and I wanted to get home and get back to, you know, my life and all that. And you know, I should have told you that I joined the Army because I wanted to find out just who Bill was. I wanted to find out what I was made of. I wanted to see if I could take what the Army could hand me and succeed, and prove to myself that I was as good as I thought I was. And I don't know if that happened. I did make it through, and I did get a lot of awards and commendations. I did make squad leader, and I did get out of AIT second fastest, and so I guess I did pretty good. And at least I was proud of myself for doing it. Well, you know, this last bit of this story is I'm going to bring in my mom. You remember the stories I told you about my mom and her sense of humor. And so out of AIT, I went home that night, and I slept in my bed that I did when I was growing up. And I was sound asleep that morning and just having a good old time. I didn't have drill sergeants yelling at me or banging metal cans or anything like that. And I was sound asleep. And the next thing I know is my mom is screaming at the top of her voice just outside of my bed. And she yells, Private Griffin, what are you doing in bed? And I tell you what, I was up and standing at attention in my underwear in front of my mom with my hands shaking. And I'm sitting there going, yes, sir. Wait a minute, this is my mom. And she did what she always does, and she just falls on the ground, rolling around and laughing. She just can't even contain herself, how happy she was that she had pulled this trick on me. almost like that sick, lame, and lazy, airborne crazy. But she got me, and she got me real good, and I stood there shaking for a while, and eventually, I was able to sit back down, and of course, there was no way I was going back to sleep, but that's me, and that's my mom, and that's just a couple stories that I had while I was in basic training, and I want to thank you for coming back to the videos and sharing this with me, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. All right, bye now.